Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. In dark times, you have to break out the big guns, and we have a very special guest today, one of the finest Celtic podcasters in the game, Tino from the wonderful Celtic Exchange podcast. We're here to chat about Celtic's transfer window, deadline day, lots of stuff. I know we're a bit earlier this morning, but I'm glad to see everyone joining us live in the chat already. We've got half an hour of chat here, Tino, to chat through what's going on at Celtic. And listen, I consider you one of the more level-headed podcasters in this game that we do. You always try to present a good faith argument. It's never personal with you, but I'm very curious to hear how you feel about the current situation at Celtic.
Yeah, John, thanks for the kind intro and good to be here. I'd like to think I'm level-headed at the best at times, but it's hard not to be angry, isn't it? It's just yet another failing by this Celtic board, and we can get into the finer detail whether is it the board or is it actually Dermot Desmond calling the shots, and I would argue that is the case. But just from a fan point of view, it's just so deflating, and we entered into a season full of so much hope and expectation. You expect to beat whoever was facing us in the qualifier. That's not happened. You expect to go to Ibrox and beat the poorest Rangers side in a long time. That's not happened. And ultimately, many fans were saying, regardless of on-field stuff, getting the transfer right, getting the transfer activity right will be the most important thing. And we failed there again, John. So I don't know where to start with it, but it's just shambolic is the word of the moment.
Yeah, just to summarise just exactly what was confirmed on the final day of the transfer window. Adam Idah moved to Swansea in a £7 million move, and Celtic signed Sebastian Tunekte in about a £5.2 million move. Stephen Welsh went on loan to Motherwell, and that was it. And my bar was low going into deadline day, into these final few days, and Celtic failed to even meet those expectations for me, Tino. And that's what's the most frustrating thing for me. I'm looking at yesterday and thinking, did Celtic come out yesterday weaker than they went into the day? Which is, again, just another level of calamity that is hard to get your head around. The reason I'm saying, we treat Celtic in good faith a lot of the time is that you try to find for the reason behind the madness. And I've been left searching for reasons, justifications, any kind of semblance of why this might have panned out the way it has. And I'm at a loss. I have to be honest. I'm at a total loss about what's going on at Celtic at the moment.
Yeah, there can't be any reason or rationale behind why they've acted in such a way. And I think ultimately what Celtic have done historically in semi-recent times is gamble in the hope that you'll get something good, at the last minute on the last day. And we had that window where we successfully got, I think it was CCV, Giakoumakis and Jota. That was a long time ago now. And actually that's an outlier. Everything else before and after has been pretty shambolic, again, to use that word. And I think getting into the end of last week, Thursday, Friday, expectations were low, given how we'd performed in the window so far. But you couldn't expect it would get worse. And it did get worse. You lose Adam Idah. You fail to move on Yang as well. That's a smaller side to everything else that's going on. But we struggle to buy players and sell players. We can't do either side right. You failed dramatically to sign Kasper Dolberg, which would have lifted some of the doom and gloom. There's nothing good to say about what's happened in the last 3-4 days.
And I think I wasn't a massive fan of Adam Idah, and it was clear he's been having his problems, especially at the start of the season. Regardless of the strengths of Adam Idah along the way, I've never been convinced by him as a starting Celtic player. He's had a good impact from the bench from time to time, and 20 goals is a decent return from a player performing that role in the Celtic squad. And in isolation, £7 million for Adam Idah, you're thinking that's pretty decent. That could be spun as a positive almost of deadline day. But then in the context of everything going on, and I know there's this chat about Kelechi Iheanacho coming in from Sevilla after getting his contract cancelled there, but that doesn't look like a good enough replacement for me. And I'm just thinking, in isolation, a good deal, but in context, that another disastrous decision from the powers that be at Celtic, especially, and we'll get on to Brendan Rodgers in a moment, but especially when Brendan Rodgers said explicitly on Friday, no more players will leave Celtic without reinforcements coming in. And then to be so undermined days later, I think leaves Brendan Rodgers in a very difficult position.
Yeah, that's the big headline for me, John. The fact that he said in as strongly, words as he could, that Idah can't go until I've got a replacement. That's the bottom line. Ida does go and no replacement comes in, and I'm not buying the Iheanacho. He may come in, but if that's the level we're at, scrambling about beyond the deadline now for guys whose best days are past them, it almost feels like that they are trying to nudge Brendan Rodgers out the door. And if Desmond, Michael Nicholson, Chris Mackay, the powers that be at Celtic, feel that Brendan Rodgers isn't their guy, then punish Brendan Rodgers as such, if punish isn't too strong a word. Move him on, pay him up the remainder of his contract and get a new guy in. But what happens instead is they seem to be punishing Brendan Rodgers and all the Celtic fans around the globe, let alone season ticket holders, folks across the world who, let's be honest, pour their heart and soul into following Celtic, and to get treated like this, to be met with this, is just a dire situation. And I know I touched on the Dermot Desmond situation earlier on, but
Yeah.
I feel he is the man calling the shots. And for whatever reason, the relationship seems to have broken down between him and Brendan Rodgers, and we're now feeling the brunt of that. It's unacceptable.
It's one of those ones where you hear all these sorts of rumours, and you hear, rumours of disconnect behind the scene and falling out, and is this because of Brendan Rodgers' contract? And it's really hard to get a grip on that because, first of all, I don't like speculating on rumour. It's just not who I am as a person, never mind as someone who does this and covers Celtic professionally. I don't like diving into that, but it's so hard not to when you're seeing something happening play out publicly in such a manner. It's clear something has happened behind the scenes. We don't really know what, and I was kind of, surmising last night that we might not find out until people write their books on Celtic and all this sort of thing. That's the level of what it feels like at the moment. And Brendan Rodgers just looks like a completely isolated figure at Celtic. The football department seem isolated from the financial department at Celtic, and I think you're right. I think there's this idea that Dermot Desmond sets this financial strategy around the club and is perhaps a little bit more involved in transfers than anyone would comfortably admit. And the fact that there is all these rumours and all these kind of almost conspiracy theories to an extent, I think is just another symptom of what you get from Celtic, which is complete silence, no sense of strategy, nothing communicated. Of course, the vacuum is going to be filled with speculation because everyone cares about Celtic and they're searching for reasonable answers as to what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, despite Brendan Rodgers telling us within the last week, I think that there is almost, quote unquote, no disconnect between him and the board. It simply cannot be true. And you can read into what people say, but ultimately you can make, I think, decent decisions based on what you're seeing, what's actually happening. And the activity over the last 24, 40 hours and beyond tells you there's a disconnect. There is absolutely no doubt about it. And I wonder if Brendan Rodgers is just playing the game as an employee. But you talk about strategy, John, you used that word. What strategy? I really, it beggars belief. And if the strategy is to scrape about, I think Celtic, if we do sign Iheanacho, which looks likely, that'll be 11 players, which is an incredibly high turnover of players. But what of those, or who of those 11 are going to have a notable impact? We've got a Kieran Tierney, who we're all excited about, but let's be honest, at the moment, there are concerns that we're not getting the Kieran Tierney we hoped for. And I really hope I'm wrong there. A massive fan of Kieran Tierney, but at the moment, he looks to be struggling. Benjamin Negren has shown in flashes he may offer something. Who knows just yet about Michelangelo Balikwisha and Sebastian Tunecki that have come in. But that's to name but 4 of the players. You can run through the rest of them as bit part experiment types. You've got a couple of loan signings. Let me see who we've got. Jemai Simpson-Pusey and Marcello Sarachi. You've got Ross Doohan, who won't or shouldn't play for Celtic. He's a backup goalie. Fine, that's kind of just standard business. You've got projects, and we're fed up talking about projects, but the projects are Shin Yamada, Callum Osmond, a guy who's never played a minute of senior football, by the way, Hayato Anamura. And I almost feel bad about getting in two-footed against these guys because it's not their fault. They're just pro footballers doing their job, signing the contracts. And let's look at Tunecki. He was announced at the 11th hour last night. And the announcement on Twitter, on X, was met with a barrage of abuse. And this guy must, I would expect a young guy to look at the signing announcement from his new club and he'll be thinking, what have I got myself in for here? What is this? And it's so unfair in these players, and ultimately it's not their fault. Adam Ida probably experienced that as well when he came in on loan that January window. Everyone was kind of going on heavy on Adam Ida, and actually it's not Adam Ida's fault, and it's not Hayato Inamura's fault. It's nobody's fault,
No.
but the higher, figures at the club who are making these baffling decisions year on year on year. And the last thing about it for now is that I wonder why we're all surprised, because
Mm,
this isn't new. This is a pattern that's
mm.
developed for some time at Celtic, and here we are again.
Yeah, I always think when you get into a position where we start to feel sorry for Celtic players, that's never a good sign, because you want your Celtic players to inspire confidence in you. And just on Balakwisha and Tinekte and potentially Nacho if he comes in, there's an African Cup of Nations coming up this year,
Yes.
and it runs from mid to late December into January. Balakwisha is declared for the Democratic Republic of Congo. Tunekti plays for Tunisia. Nacho plays for Nigeria. These players could be missing for a large chunk of matches in a critical period of the season with no winter break. And that's just another little worry about the squad's preparation going into the next bunch of games. We know Thursday to Sunday football is no joke at the best of times, even when you have a fantastic squad. And I'm pretty worried. Like, I'd never thought I would be in a position this year where I would be worried about what's going on in the Scottish Premiership, and never mind Europe, you know. But now suddenly I know Celtic have a points lead over Rangers, etc. But I'm taking nothing for granted here. I think every game from this point onwards is a battle, because Celtic's chance creation is just non-existent at the moment, and it's going to be a real. Celtic need to find something within themselves to get through these the so-called run of the mill games. Never mind the Europa League games, and that's my immediate worry too. And we're talking about perception of players and how tough that can be. I'm looking at Yang, who Brendan Rodgers indicated on Friday has showed patience this summer in the fact that he probably wanted away earlier in the summer and has kind of been a fringe player at Celtic, gets the kind of permission to go down to Birmingham City, and then the move gets pulled. And I'm thinking, how does he come back and function in this team with any sort of confidence, given the way things have panned out? So I think you're right. The squad wise, I think there's serious concerns. But the bigger picture is, as you've said there, is this is a trend. And Tina, I know you did a fantastic podcast documentary series on the kind of Save Ourselves, Seltzer Change type of campaign in the 90s, etc. What lessons do you think can be learned from them? Does any lessons from that period apply to this current situation in terms of what supporters can do to get the club to act in a way that feels consistent with modern football club strategy?
I actually feel, John, that there is a link and a legacy almost, from those dark days of the 90s. Celtic are in a completely different stratosphere financially. We went to the wall, I think, back around about the 4th of March 1994, and Fergus McCann sweeps into power. We've now got anywhere between 70 and 100 million in the bank, depending on how things land. But we're cash rich. We're in a really healthy position. But actually, I believe that there is still a fear deep rooted within Celtic of ever ending up back in that position. And obviously, you've seen the failings at Ibrox, in 2012 or whatever that was. And I think Celtic are so afraid. They're so conservative as a club, as a board, that despite having these vast sums of money, they're still so frugal and so careful. And they're very much of a mindset that I think they're saving for a rainy day. I think they have seen the writing on the wall as to what European qualification looks like in the years ahead. And rather than say we'll do our level best to make sure we're there this year and next year and the year after, they've just clammed up and they've thought, if we have 2 or 3 seasons without Champions League, we're going to be in trouble. And I think they've played so safe, but so safe to the detriment of what's going on. And, I think overall, given last night's sign, I think we've spent around about 13 million. And then you look across the city, and you shouldn't benchmark yourself against Rangers, don't get me wrong, but they're not afraid to spend cash to back their manager. That's the ultimate story there. And you can apply the same to Hearts, Hibs, and even Aberdeen. I think Aberdeen made a smart signing at the death as well. They've signed a Swedish international, no less, massive for Aberdeen. I think Hibs broke their transfer record this window. So there's other clubs being ambitious, and it's not entitled, John, to want your club, any club, whoever you support, to be the very best they can be within their means. That's all Celtic fans are asking for. We're not asking for the earth. We're not asking the club to sell off the family silverware and leave us on the brink. Just strengthen within your means. And once again, we've failed to do so. And it's just so frustrating and it's so unnecessary. This is a situation all of Celtic's making, John, and it doesn't have to be this way.
And just this toxicity that's developing, I think, between the support and the club. again, everything happening is one thing, but there's ways to manage the kind of way that you're going about things too. And I think what Celtic are doing at the moment with the kind of their strategy of silence, etc., is they're feeding the toxicity. They're not doing anything to alleviate it, and that's what's also confusing. And it's not, as you know, it's not people within the club at lower levels, staff level. It's not their fault. Again, this is something that comes from the top down at Celtic. This is, I feel, Dermot Desmond does not like media. He does not like people talking about Celtic in any sort of meaningful way in a public sphere. He's made that clear on many occasions in the past. And I feel like he's just basically told anyone at Celtic, Michael Nicholson, down. Don't talk about anything at Celtic. Don't talk about our business. Don't say anything. And again, that might have worked 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's 2025, Tino. This is, transparency is the only thing that really works in terms of connecting with an audience anymore. And I just don't really understand why they can't see that. Surely someone within Celtic has to be pushing for more to be said about all of this.
Yeah, the term you used there, John, I've written it down. Strategy of silence. That is our approach, a strategy of silence. And you and I both spent time in our working lives at the club, 10 years or so ago. And I'm sure you'd agree there's lots of talented and really committed individuals working at Celtic, some really good folks who are all Celtic as well. Not that should be the be-all and end-all, but there's people who really want the best for the club at certain levels. But none of that matters if you've got someone at the top of the pile who just dictates the strategy of silence and otherwise. And in a day and age when it's never been easier to speak to fans and to communicate with fans, we seem to have regressed. And it's inexplicable, how that's come to be. And even though we only really hear from Michael Nicholson, the board once a year at the AGM, which is probably coming up November time, something like that. And that's all stage managed and carefully pulled together videos. Surely, as let's call, just for now, us as fans paying customers, surely you need to speak to your paying customers at least more than once a year, particularly given that once these Europa League packages come out, John, and I'm not taking on mine, but I know a lot of people will, and everyone's entitled to make their choice there. Some people will have spent close to £1,000 on Celtic already this season, and that's before you've taken kits and merchandise and other things into the picture, between season tickets, Europa League, the Newcastle friendly, 25 quid, the Falkirk Cup game, something somewhere else in the mix there. It is a lot of money for folks to be paying. And as always, the fans continue to meet their end of the bargain. So what are the club doing? This is that relationship between club and fans, it's almost an unspoken two-way agreement. We'll do our bit. We'll buy the tickets. We'll support the club financially. We'll back you vocally in the stands and otherwise. You do your bit by supplying the team and the manager with the best possible chance of success. And there is no way they can claim to have done so. And I'd love to think that someone from the club in the coming days would come out and address what has undoubtedly been a failing. But evidence tells us that it won't be Michael Nicholson. That just isn't how Michael Nicholson presents as a CEO. So will it be Dermot? Absolutely not. We see him now and then for Champions League games. Chris Mackay plays second fiddle to Michael, but we won't hear from him. Paul Tisdale has come in. There was a lot of chat about his role in recruitment, and he won't speak either. And ultimately, and everyone will have different opinions, by the way, on Brendan Rodgers at the moment, and there's been some failings on the park, absolutely. But time after time after time, he's left to carry the can and be the sole spokesperson for the club about matters that he shouldn't be speaking about. I remember after the home game against Kairat Almaty, by the time I got back to the car, his interview was on BBC Scotland, and he was getting in the neck, but it was questions that he shouldn't have been facing. And he found himself repeating himself by saying, that's not for me to say, that's not my job, and someone else needs to do this. But nobody else backs him up. And I think you said earlier in the piece, John, he cuts a really isolated figure, and he absolutely does. And in times like this, and again, to look historically, Dermot Desmond's going nowhere. The board won't go anywhere, and the only movable pieces will be the manager and or his head of recruitment. And we've seen so many of them fall in recent times, whether it be Mark Lawwell, Nick Hammond, Lee Congerton, sorry. These are the guys that seem to carry the can. They seem easy fall guys, and I think you'll probably see that again. Tisdale and or Rodgers will move on either around about now or certainly at the end of the season, and we'll all move on as if nothing's happened.
Yeah, that I was actually going to ask you, is Paul Tisdale going to be the fall guy here? And like you say, the evidence suggests that he will be. And listen, you're talking about AGM coming up. In about 2 weeks, Celtic will release their financial report for the year ended 30th of June 2025. What that's going to show again is that Celtic have had massive amounts of revenue. It will show tens of millions in cash reserves in the bank. What I think is important, and you made a good point there, is like it's a personal decision for every fan of how much money they put into the club through merchandise, ticket sales, whatever. It's a personal decision. But what I think fans need to understand is the power they hold financially within the club. What this, as every financial report educates us, but what this one will too, the one coming up in a couple of weeks. I think Celtic released it on the 16th of September last year, so it's due in the next fortnight. What it will show is that a vast amount of money that goes into Celtic is generated by supporters and by success on the field. And the money that's generated by supporters is through ticket sales and merchandise. It's a massive tranche of Celtic's revenue. And I think supporters need to understand that that is the power collectively that the support has. Celtic's revenue, yes, Celtic's run well as a business in terms of the non-football side of things, commercially, etc., etc., etc. But fans are generating the vast amount of Celtic income, and that's I think is really important to underline when people are making personal decisions about, you know, what money they put into the club. That is something that people need to know and need to be aware of, because it's not spoken about by Celtic. I don't know if they don't want people to understand that Celtic fans have all the power financially at the club, or you know, I'm not sure if they want to communicate that, but it's just the reality of the situation, and that's what makes this also dangerous, Tino. That's kind of my point as well. When you have a total lack of engagement and your revenue is underpinned by people that you need to engage with, then you're surely sailing for rocky waters.
Yeah, I think we might see some of it in the Europa League. As I say, my tiny protest is that I won't buy my Europa League package. But I've heard a lot of noise from our audience at the Celtic Exchange and otherwise of many folks doing the same. There are a lot of folks, as we speak, cancelling their Home Cup ticket scheme membership, if you like, and they're right to do so because it's all take. As I say, it's a one-way street, and the point we keep coming back to is that Celtic are an extremely well-run business, first and foremost, but not an extremely well-run football club. And we profess to be a Champions League club, but we don't behave in that way. We don't have the mentality of a Champions League club. And they're even just a wee bit behind the scenes, but there's a former commercial director at Celtic, Adrian Philby, who I'm sure you'll know of, John.
Yeah.
Adrian was there when I was at the club and had been there for some time and moved on. Maybe not quite a year ago, but somewhere close to a year ago now. Celtic have still not replaced the commercial director. Now, that's a pretty senior position in the club. Maybe, I don't know, fourth or fifth, highest in the ranking in terms of overall positions at the club. Adrian's still not been replaced. He moved to Aston Villa. I think took a couple of staff members with him too. And so from the outside looking in, Celtic are a well-run business, not a well-run football club, but a well-run business. But actually, there's signs that that's starting to creak as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, the other chat, of course, we see is that the stadium's in dire need of repair in different places. The banners at the back of the Jock Stein stand have yet to be replaced. There's all sorts of stuff going on, and it's hard not to feel that there is a malaise. Do you know what? I'm using the same terrible terms time after time. Malaise, disconnect. Words I never use in my life unless I'm talking about Celtic. But there is a malaise that seems to have set in across the board at boardroom level, stadium level, on the pitch level, recruitment level, at all levels. And you can see where, ultimately from a footballing point of view, Brendan Rodgers carries the can. But I would give him a fair bit of leeway. Listen, he failed at Ibrox and he failed to beat Kairat Almaty, and I think he should be beating those two teams at this moment in time. But you can also understand why there must be a serious demotivation for him and his players when they continue to look. Brendan Rodgers has practically begged for support in his front line. He's begged for it in recent interviews, and he's not got it. And how would any of us feel in any line of work or whatever if you're seeking help from the powers that be and you continually don't get it? You're going to fall flat, and maybe that's why you get results like what we've had recently. It's just inexplicable, John.
and people might say it doesn't feed into the players, etc. But Callum McGregor also talking in the media very publicly about the need for signings. So it does translate into, it does come into the dressing room sphere. It does have an effect. All of this has an effect. And you make a good point there about other departments at Celtic showing signs of creaking. That's not an isolated story. You hear stories across departments at Celtic that things maybe aren't quite functioning the way that they should be, and there's, staff not being replaced, etc., etc. And that does fall on Michael Nicholson squarely. He is the chief executive of this company, which is like, look, I know Peter Lawwell was not the most popular person at Celtic, and traditionally hasn't been for quite a long time, and people can say what they like about Peter Lawwell, and you can say plenty, as I say, but at least he was a semi-visible presence as the chief executive. He didn't give media interviews on a weekly basis, but he did put himself out there from time to time. He would talk to club media a bit more regularly than Michael Nicholson has, and I just don't understand it. I don't actually understand it, and it's not acceptable. I mean, if anyone with any sense at Celtic this week would have Michael Nicholson in front of a camera, taking responsibility, taking accountability, and explaining what went wrong and what can be fixed, or what they're looking to fix going forward. And that's all people are asking for, Tino. We're not asking for the world. We're asking for a bit of honesty, a bit of accountability, a bit of responsibility. These guys get paid well enough to take that on their shoulders. And someone needs to, it can't just be Brendan Rodgers anymore. I don't think it's fair on him.
Ultimately, you're right, it is not fair on the manager, who, as I say, isn't immune, or shouldn't be immune to criticism at this moment in time. But I've described recent times as a collective failing at Celtic, and there's so many people that aren't, for different reasons, acting in the right manner and doing the right things. And yeah, I think all of us would like Michael Nicholson to be more visible, but for example, I mean, he's very well paid, Michael Nicholson. I think that's on public record. You can see that. But if he's not that guy, if you're not that vocal guy as a chief exec, okay, get someone in who is alongside you. A chief operating officer, someone like that, who becomes your spokesperson. And Chris Mackay, seems to be Michael's right hand man, but he's not that guy. And I've moaned there about staged managed AGMs. I'd bite your hand off for a stage managed anything right now. Just somebody somewhere to please explain what has happened over the last certainly 48 hours, but further back than that, and to give us some sight of the vision, the plan, the strategy, if there is one. And we've said for quite a long time on our show that there must be a strategy of sorts, right? There's people behind the scenes that must have these discussions, but Celtic are so afraid to show their hand, because when you show your hand and set out your vision, you become accountable for it. And if you fail, then that's when you get it in the neck. And Celtic are so afraid of that. Again, so conservative. They won't tell us the vision. And it's brought in a stark contrast when you see guys like Tony Bloom over at Hearts and other guys just now getting their fans excited, and that's a big part of it, but be on board. If you tell people the plan, they can buy into it. And if Celtic were, much more transparent about why we can't sign this guy, but why we can maybe push the boat for this guy, and so on and so forth, you might not like it as a fan, but you could make your peace with it. You could get your head around it and say, well, okay, I can see why they're maybe doing this. But as you said earlier, John, there's a void. And when there's a void, people fill it with all sorts of stuff, and mostly negative stuff. And, we as a podcast, and you guys as a channel, and the various other, brilliant Celtic content providers, you need to fill the space with something, and you'll fill it with opinions and thoughts and feelings. But a lot of it, to an extent, will be guesswork. Informed guesses and your best guesses, based on your genuine feelings. But the club just leave those gaps to be filled. And again, out with even just all your transfer activity and all the mess of that, if nothing but your communication is good, then you'll be in a far better place with your audience, your fan base, your customers, your paying customers. And we've never felt so far from the club than we do right now.
I agree with that. Listen, if you want to hear more from Tino, I would very much recommend checking out the wonderful Celtic Exchange podcast. I'll put all the links in the description below. As I say, one of the best Celtic podcasts out there, one of the most level-headed podcasts out there, which I think in these stormy waters is welcome by people. And again, I got this a little bit on social media last night. is like when you are kind of viewed as one of the more positive fans, or whatever, when you do start speaking about what's going wrong, people start to notice more. I
Yeah.
got a bit of that last night. People shocked that I was so angry on last night's video. But that's where we are, folks, unfortunately. And listen, Tino, thank you for joining us today. Thanks everyone in the live chat for joining us as well. Very busy this morning, as you can imagine. People kind of trying to figure out whether they've just woke up from a nightmare yesterday, or what's going on. But we appreciate all of you. Leave your comments below with regard to how you feel about Celtic at the moment and where it's going. Unfortunately, Tino, as always, we never solved anything today, but the issues, I think, are getting out there, and I think supporters are waking up to the fact that this cannot continue, which I think is a positive thing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the silver lining, if we're looking for silver linings, is at least that's over for now and we can regroup. But from a fan point of view, fans won't now be back at Celtic Park until I think the 27th of September, a Kilmarnock game. That's a long time to wait and a long time to get angry, because let's be honest, fans are angry. And John, you mentioned the fact that you maybe become more animated in the last 24 hours. It's because you care, and because everyone cares, and because Celtic means so much to all of us. And it's not just any other football club. As I said at the top of the piece, fans pour their heart and soul into Celtic, and all you want is to be met with the same in return. And that's not happening right now, and that's why there's just such high emotion, high feeling at this moment in time. And we can only hope it gets better. But again, talking about trends and patterns, the stories historically in recent times tell us they won't change, and that's the most galling thing at this moment in time. So I'd love to have come on, John, and been cheery, and it's a pleasure to come on and speak to you. But we are where we are at this moment in time, and we just need to hope for some sort of change, even though we're not really feeling that right now.
Yep, thank you, Tino. Thanks, everyone. Everyone, we'll see you again next time on the Celtic